Ethiopia dismisses report by Human Rights Watch as distorted. And fighting escalates in Khartoum after ceasefire expires. Greetings, dear viewers, ladies and gentlemen. This is ETV News with the news. I'm Shfarao. Thank you for joining us. Now, the Ethiopian government on Tuesday rejected a report by the Human Rights Watch that accused local authorities and regional forces of pursuing a campaign of quote-unquote ethnic cleansing in western Tigray despite last year's peace deal. The allegations are not substantiated by evidence, Ethiopia's government communication service said in a statement. This distorted and misleading portrayal of the situation attempts to undermine peaceful coexistence and fuel inter-ethnic conflict and obstruct the national efforts for peace and reconciliation, it said. The Ethiopian government said the US-based rights group had made the allegations, quote-unquote, without conducting a thorough and credible investigation in all areas affected by the conflict. The statement said Addis Ababa has embarked on nationwide consultations on a process for transitional justice, which would allow a comprehensive investigation. The truth will be told and perpetrators of crimes will be held accountable, it said. Now, the Council of Ministers approved a total of 801.6 billion birr draft budget for the year 2023-24 Ethiopian fiscal year. The approval was made during its 21st regular session, the Office of the Prime Minister confirmed. The fiscal year draft budget of the federal government has been prepared from the outlook of maintaining national helping citizens displaced by natural and man-made disasters, rebuilding the infrastructure damaged due to conflicts, and achieving the directions and objectives of social and economic transformation that may occur in the future. The proposed budget was presented to the Council as 369.6 billion birr for the regular expenses of the federal government, 203.9 billion birr for capital expenses, 214.7 billion for support to the regional states, and 14 billion birr for the implementation of sustainable development goals, with a total of 801.65 billion birr. That sometimes blowout of proportion African events. The scholars further elaborated that African-owned media houses need to take the initiative to report a well-balanced and positive stories regarding the continent. Well, dear viewers, we apologize for that technical glitch. Now, African media scholars approached by EBC reiterate that various Western media houses tend to report solely on negative contents that sometimes blow out of proportion African events. The scholars further elaborated that African-owned media houses need to take the initiative to report a well-balanced and positive stories regarding the continent. Tigistani says more.
The sharing of biased and false news has become.
For generations, that single story for Africa has been one of despair, famously headlined as the hopeless continent. The newer single story about Africa is that of rising Africa. It is now high time to get beyond this new single story as well. Africans are far from being a single people. While technically comprising 54 countries with 16.72% of the total world population, there are potentially even more nations within Africa. Despite all that, according to the most Western media houses, premeditated narratives, multiple stories, those are pretty far-fetched from the reality on the ground, and ill-founded reports have been produced about the entire African continent.
And the Ethiopian and Eritrean governments.
BBC has found that nearly 2,500 children died of malnutrition
repression in Ethiopia's.
Approached by EBC, media scholars from around Africa reiterated that reporting about Africans, various Western media houses tend to report solely negative contents that sometimes blows out of proportion. The scholars further elaborated that African-owned media houses need to take initiatives of reporting a well-balanced and positive stories regarding the continent.
Just looking at what media can contribute is like actually bringing Africa on board. It's like reporting positively about Africa. It's like actually getting the world to know that Africa is not only about wars, that Africa is not only about conflicts, Africa is not only about corruption and theft and all that. So we have a lot of good things that are happening in Africa that can contribute to the world's development.
Kind of journalistic practice that really, originates from us and then is for us and is about us. And we need just to have that kind of journalism.
Andrew Nyanyuki from Eastern African University in Rwanda stressed for his part that for far too long Africans were denied to tell their own stories, which now the due course need to be changed, he noted.
They've been telling our stories in the manner that they deem best, in a manner that serves their interests. But I think it's time we walk the talk. It's not that we don't know that other people telling our story is wrong, and it's not that we don't have the ability to tell our own stories. We have the ability, we have the means, we just need to start like yesterday.
He also went on saying that having one mouthpiece as Regional African Media Center might help reshape the image of Africa.
It will be one of the significant moves towards even achieving a united Africa if we will have one center that we consider the mouthpiece of the African ideology, of the African agenda.
Stressing the need to mute the voices that propel separatism and interventionist premeditated agendas through various Western media outlets, he says African governments need to address own weaknesses internally. He further indicated that imported solutions for African problems never brought lasting solutions.
At any moment you've seen Africans trying to import solutions to their problems, those solutions have always failed. They've always ended up in waste of time, waste of resources.
The answer is Africa.
Now, the mayor of Addis Ababa, Adana Chabibi, has launched the construction of the Window of Africa mega project. The project comprises 5 lots with various features in each. The first lot is awarded to China First Highway Engineering Company, while the remaining 4 lots will be done in partnership with Ethiopian business people. The contractor is expected to complete the construction of Lot 1 in a year and a half, and it lies on 14.5 hectares of land comprising flower garden and recreational areas. Welcome back. Now, the State Minister for Urban and Infrastructure, Fanta Dejene, highlighted the major policy issues related to structural transformations which Ethiopia is undertaking to modernize the urban sector. The Ethiopian delegation led by the State Minister is taking part in the 2nd session of the UN Habitat Assembly, which is being held beginning June 5 in Nairobi, Kenya, themed for a better urban future. In a statement he made at the opening session, the State Minister highlighted the major policy issues related to structural transformations which the government of Ethiopia is undertaking to modernize the urban sector, according to the Ethiopian Embassy in Kenya. The event was officially opened by William Ruto, the President of the Republic of Kenya. Moving on, the Russian ambassador to Ethiopia, Evgeny Terekin, underlines the importance of promoting multilateralism and multilingualism, human identity and civilization. His remark came when the Russian embassy in Addis Ababa in the United Nations colorfully celebrated the annual Russian Language Day in the premises of the United Nations Economic Commission for Africa. Kasaljani reports.
Russian embassy in Addis Ababa and the United Nations celebrated Russian Language Day colorfully on the premises of the United Nations Economic Commission of Africa in the presence of various countries' ambassadors, the diplomatic corps, Ethiopian high government officials, and Russian-speaking Ethiopians and dignitaries. The initiative of the United Nations Language Days was launched in February 2010 to celebrate multilingualism and cultural diversity and to promote equal use of all six of the UN's official working languages throughout the organization. In 2010, the United Nations created Language Days for each of their 6 official languages: Arabic, Chinese, English, French, Russian, and Spanish. The goal is to promote multilingualism and cultural diversity. June 6 was chosen as Ervis, the birthday of Alexander Pushkin, the father of Russian literature. In his opening remarks, Antonio Pedro, the acting Secretary General of the United Nations Economic Commission for Africa, said that commemorating Language Day is in line with human culture, civilization, humanity, and sovereignty, stating that Russian Language Day, which is the working language of the United Nations, is the second most widely spoken language over the internet across the world.
The Russian language is the second most widely used language on the internet, the 4th most translated language in the world, and the 7th most common language into which content is translated. It is spoken by 350 million people, counting, and continues to be a lingua franca throughout much of Eastern Europe, Central Asia, and the Caucasus. This demonstrates the Russian language extends beyond the borders of the Russian Federation, thanks to its use and status as an official language of the United Nations. We are celebrating all that today. The Economic Commission for Africa is working hard to strengthen cooperation with our partners in multilingualism. To that end, we have reached an agreement with the Russian Center for Science and Culture in Addis Ababa to create a Pushkin section within the ECA library.
Appreciating the United Nations for its great cooperation to celebrate the Russian Language Day, Yevgeny Tarahin, Russian ambassador to Ethiopia, explained to the attendees that the day is celebrated to promote multilingualism, civilization, and heritage.
Well, today is the 6th of June, the day when we celebrate the birthday of our great ancestor and our great poet and writer Alexander Pushkin. He is considered to be the father of the modern literature language of Russia. And due to this, we decided to pronounce in 2011 by special decree of the President of Russian Federation. This day was pronounced as the national holiday, the Day of Russian Language. For us, Russian language is our native language. We like it, we are proud of it. At the same time, Russian language is a language of international communication. It is one of the United Nations languages.
The director of the Pushkin Center for Science and Culture in Addis Ababa also said that the center has been undertaking a wide range of activities to spread the Russian language and knowledge to Ethiopians and citizens of other countries living in Ethiopia.
Russian cultural centers, this time we call them Russian houses, in many countries in the world. It is a network organization. On the African continent, first of all, I would like to introduce to your attention few our stations where Russian language is performed, where Russian language is delivered to the societies of each African country where we have our stations.
Following a decision of the United Nations Educational, Scientific and Cultural Organization UNESCO in 2010 to celebrate the Russian Language Day every year, it will be celebrated every year at the Commission Hall in Addis Ababa.
Meanwhile, Ethiopian students who studied the Russian language at home and abroad agreed that learning the language is essential if one wants to learn more about the long-standing diplomatic ties between Ethiopia and Russia. The students also advised other Ethiopians to learn the Russian language. Their views have been compiled as follows.
Advantage which it gives to me is that I went to the Soviet Union at the time and studied Russian language. Not only Russian language, international law in Russian language. So it helps me to communicate with Russians, and there are many foreigners who know Russian language. So I came back to Ethiopia and joined the Ministry of Foreign Affairs. And as soon as I joined the Ministry of Foreign Affairs, after 2 years, I was assigned to Moscow as a diplomat, because the Russian language, it helps me to be appointed there to Russian language. Before going to Moscow as a diplomat, I was an interpreter to Comrade Mengistu Haile from Russian into Amharic.
I wish, really I wish, because I hope they will get a lot of, not only the education, how to live, how the culture is, how the people are moving, how they are doing, how all these things beyond this education course.
I stayed in Russia, Moscow, for 3 years, studying material science. The first year is preparatory course, which means we studied Russian language, culture, and some disciplinary scientific work in Russia. After 1 year, we just getting to the normal course. So from there, I learned a lot of things, because in our country, even I am a lecturer, so I know the problem of the laboratory and the practical work. So there they have an intensive practical work, laboratory, and also the professors are highly experienced. They are well-known publisher online research. So obviously, learning there and sharing experience from those professors, it's really, really exciting for me.
Russian language is one of the 6 languages of United Nations. And the second thing is in Russian language, it's more widely spread throughout Europe. And I studied also in Russia. Before I left to Russia, I studied here at Pushkin Center for 1 year. So then I joined Krasnodar University, and I studied there preparatory and first year. Then I left Krasnodar. I just joined in Ukraine, Kharkov region. Also studied agronomy as a plant breeding I studied. And Russian language is very vital. I like to read literature. So for me, it's from the first source of a Russian language, like Dostoevsky, Chekhov, Tolstoy, Gorky, and Belayev. A lot of writers I read in Russian language.
I urge all Ethiopians to go to Russia and study this language, because it is very expressive, very expressive. Now, when I go to some international organizations, I want to listen speeches and lectures in Russian rather than English, because Russian expresses everything.
The education system is highly advanced, and the professors are highly experienced. So it's obviously, I recommend everyone who has a chance to participate. There are plenty scholarship, government scholarship and open door, and there are a lot of universities that offering scholarship for Ethiopian, especially for Africa. So they participate, and if they win, it's good to go in Russia.
Now, moving to other stories, Ethiopia has been providing a proper response for national and international shocks to prevent the nation's sustainable economic development. And participants pointed out that strong business environment partnership is also instrumental to realize the continent's economic ambitions. We have more on that.
The recent trade and investment relations among African countries are not exceeded 20%, and it placed under its huge potential. Most of African countries imported goods and products out of Africa. To improve the existing problem, the first African Trade and Investment Summit opened in Addis Ababa to promote trade and investment relations among African countries. Speaking on the occasion, State Minister for Industry Hassan Mohammed said the summit is critical to improve trade and investment relations among African countries.
If the foreign investors come to Ethiopia, there will be a job creation, the productivity will increase, and it ultimately will increase the share of the economic for the country of Ethiopia. The participants comes from different countries and different continents which are interested to invest in Ethiopia in order to boost the economy and the relationship between other countries.
According to Hassan, Ethiopia is the leading African country in registering remarkable growth in attracting foreign direct investment in Eastern African region.
So this is a kind of promotion and networking for the foreign investors to invest in Ethiopia, and we explain to them the opportunity we have in Ethiopia and the natural endowment which God gave us gave Ethiopia, and to invest more in Ethiopia, and they will get much more benefit if they come to Ethiopia and invest.
The capacity of managing national and international shocks plays a significant role to register sustainable and resilient economic development in Ethiopia, the State Minister underlined. Abdul Nasser Turki, who is chairman and CEO of the Investment Center for Africa, for his part said further efforts are needed to improve trade and investment relations among African countries.
The objective of this summit is promoting investment and trade of Ethiopia, including the mining and agricultural and other sectors. And also it's helped our African and international investors to participate with us here, to network with our local Ethiopian business actors.
It is expected that critical decisions that help us to bolster African trade and investment will be decided in the first African Trade and Investment Summit in Addis Ababa. Ministers, representatives from African countries, development partners, business persons, policy advisors, among others, are attending on the first African Trade and Investment Summit in the metropolis.
Into the hinterland of Uganda.
Moving to continental news, fighting continues between Sudan's warring generals in a pattern of ceasefire being agreed and then broken, and at least 863 people have been killed since violence between the Sudanese army and the rapid support forces erupted in April. Shagamat has more on that.
The sight of a plume of thick smoke above Khartoum has become familiar. The conflict between the army and their paramilitary rivals, the RSF, has entered its 8th week. There was some respite over the weekend while a truce briefly held, but like all the other ceasefires since mid-April, it was ruthlessly violated and ultimately didn't last. Life for the people left behind in Khartoum has become intolerable.
We want the war to stop. Most people can barely keep themselves warm and avoid hunger. No one knows how long the conflict is going to last and when it will end.
The UN says 1.2 million people have been displaced, with more than 425,000 fleeing abroad, many of them to camps in neighboring Chad. For decades, Sudan has been torn by multiple intersecting conflicts. Clashes at the weekend killed scores of people in Darfur, the western region where violence has raged for 20 years. In 2011, the people of southern Sudan opted for full independence through secession from the north, creating South Sudan. Provision for the referendum was laid out in the comprehensive peace agreement that ended a prolonged conflict between North and South. The current fighting is a result of tensions that had been building between the army and the RSF. In 2021, working together, they toppled the transitional government that had been in place since the overthrow of former strongman Omar al-Bashir 2 years earlier. Thousands of people protested against the prospect of returning to military rule.
I really think that civilians and civilian groups do need to be involved in continuing political processes. The 2005 agreement, for example, showed a massive peace dividends. But these agreements only hold as far as the political processes that led to their establishment in the first place can be made secure.
Instead of transiting to civilian rule, Sudan is falling into an abyss, and an internal military power struggle is denying the Sudanese people democracy and peace.
And finally, U.S. Secretary of State Antony Blinken is set to embark on a 3-day visit to Saudi Arabia. He has called for the normalization of ties between Saudi Arabia and Israel. The story is presented as follows.
The U.S. Secretary of State Antony Blinken is set to embark on a 3-day visit to Saudi Arabia. He has called for the normalization of ties between Saudi Arabia and Israel. Blinken is expected to arrive this evening in Jeddah. In the next 2 days, he will be in Riyadh for a ministerial meeting of the Gulf Cooperation Council, the members of the 80-strong coalition of countries fighting the Islamic State group. They will also meet in Blinken's presence. Besides his diplomatic counterparts, Blinken is also expected to meet with Crown Prince Mohammed bin Salman. Washington has stepped up its push for normalization of Saudi and Israeli ties in the wake of the success of the Abraham Accords. The initiative was launched by the former U.S. President Donald Trump to persuade Arab countries to recognize the Jewish state.
The United States has a real national security interest in promoting normalization between Israel and Saudi Arabia. We believe that we can, and indeed we must, play an integral role in advancing it. Now, we have no illusions that this can be done quickly or easily, but we remain committed to working toward that outcome, including on the trip I'm about to take this week to Jeddah and Riyadh for engagements with our Saudi and Gulf counterparts.
The Israel in Saudi Arabia have long maintained regular contacts at an official level. Riyadh has recognized Israel. U.S. Secretary of State Antony Blinken pledged continued U.S. commitment to both Israel's security and a two-state solution to the Israel-Palestinian conflict. He nonetheless added that the expansion of the Jewish settlements would be an obstacle to peace. Now, despite long-standing closed eyes, the U.S. relations with the Saudis have been testy in recent years. The two have been at loggerheads over the murder of the journalist Jamal Khashoggi and Riyadh's efforts to raise oil prices after Russia's invasion of Ukraine. In addition, the Saudis recently gave China an opening into the West Asian political dynamics when Beijing brokered a rapprochement between Riyadh and its arch-rival Tehran. And just last month, Prince Mohammed also hosted Syria's President Bashar al-Assad in Jeddah. Washington rejects the legitimacy of his government in Syria. Saudi is also reportedly joining Iran's regional naval alliance, and the U.S. is surely not pleased by these acts of Saudi Arabia.
Well, viewers, now a quick reminder of the top stories. Ethiopia dismisses reports by Human Rights Watch as distorted. And fighting escalates in Khartoum after ceasefire expires. That's all the news there is for now. Thanks a lot for watching us.